Hello, welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. Let's see. Rainy. Trains have returned. That's okay. I went hiking yesterday. That was nice. What else have I been doing? Busy sketching, busy knitting. Lindy, this is for you, but I'm in the middle of knitting this. This is a Fair Isle vest. I might put cap sleeves in it, but what happens is this is for an armhole, and what happens is you sew and then you cut this, and then you'll pick up stitches to create your armhole. This is how these are traditionally made. And then right here, this is the neck. So same thing, you'll cut right here, and then this will be a V-neck. But anyway, I'm not following the chart appropriately, and I have the wrong colors here. And it's like right here in the sweater, right? So of course you're gonna notice. So I have to rip this out. And it's just, anyway, it's painful. It's painful. Those of you who are knitters know it's painful. So I haven't knit for a couple of days because I'm not like emotionally prepared to face that. If you're a knitter, you understand that too. What have I been doing? I've been doing a lot of audiobooks. So last week I talked about my painting the bathroom cabinets. I painted the drawers that didn't match. So now the doors and the drawers match. So I need to move on with my next painting project, which is like painting all of the chips, you know, in all of my white baseboards, door frames. But I gotta figure out which paint to use. And I probably need to wait till it's warm enough that we're opening up all the doors and windows, now that I think about it, so that I'm not asphyxiating us all. What have I read? So I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks because of these various projects going on. So I listened to She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is the first in a fantasy duology that's sort of a retelling of the foundation of the Ming Dynasty and the defeat of the Mongols. I really enjoyed the beginning of this book. So it starts with our main character, Chu, who is a girl. Bandit, you know, it's a time of famine, and bandits come to her house to steal food and end up killing her father and her brother. And her brother is sort of like the special one because he had a prophecy of being great. And so she just, and that he's supposed to enter a monastery when he's 12. And so her fate is to do nothing. And so she decides she's going to steal her brother's fate. And she knows she's going to starve to death. There's literally no food in her family's home. Everybody's starving. So she goes to a monastery, and I think she's like 10 or something like that, and sort of gets in and pretends to be her brother Chu. And so her whole life, she starts off pretending to be her brother Chu. And the beginning is a sort of life in the monastery, her hiding her female body, and then sort of the politics behind the monastery and how the monastery is involved in sort of the larger politics between the ethnic Chinese and the ethnic Mongols. And all of that I really enjoyed. I liked the characterization. I liked everything about it. There was a lot of interesting discussion about fate, and is fate something that happens to you, or is fate something that you create for yourself? And that's sort of a theme that goes on throughout the book. But as the book goes on and Chu leaves the monastery and gets more involved into the political situation in the area, it becomes a lot of politics, a lot of conversation between characters. You have battles happening. And to me, it started to get very plot heavy, and all of the good characterization work that happened in the beginning kind of got lost. I think Parker Chan might have been better served if she cut out some of the battle back and forth and, you know, kind of simplified that storyline. You know, to allow the characters to really shine and grow. So there's some interesting things with gender here too. And Parker Chan is non-binary. And so Chu, there's some interesting things about Chu and her perception about her body, about the roles of women, the roles of men. She does marry a woman, and they do, you know, have a sexual relationship. And her main adversary on the Mongols is a eunuch. So again, there's a lot of interesting commentary on gender roles, masculine, feminine. But a lot of that stuff just wasn't enough to carry this book for me. So again, a lot of that interesting conversation and a lot of the interesting characterization in my mind just sort of fizzled out. So I followed Nancy Pearl's advice and skipped to the end. Just to see how it ended. And I won't be going on in this duology. You know, I'm sort of thinking fantasy is just not for me. But I will say this is very, very light on the fantasy. There is some magical elements. On the Chinese side, you have the Prince of Radiance. And he has some magical ability that is meant to be a signal of his divine authority. So that was kind of that, which was kind of ended up being kind of a disappointment. Then I got a jump on my Gray and May reading. I picked up The Tree Doctor by Matsuki Mockett. This name was ringing a bell for me. And I actually realized I read an earlier nonfiction book of hers, American Harvest, a few years ago. She is a Japanese American author, and this book is about, this is a pandemic book. So this is about a woman who lives in Hong Kong with her husband and 2 children, who has a sick mother back at home in California, in the Carmel Valley. And her mother has dementia, and so she goes home to visit her mother and help her, and this is right when lockdown occurs, and she's not able to get back to Hong Kong. So her mother is in a home. She's living in her family home in the Carmel Valley and starts to take care of her parents' garden. She is a teacher at a university, an international university in Hong Kong. And she teaches Japanese literature, and in particular, she teaches a seminar on the tales of Genji. And I really liked how Mockett uses the tales of Genji and the garden to mirror what is happening with the main character. Let me get back to that. So as she's caring for the garden, some of the trees have some issues, and she ends up, going to the local nursery and meeting the tree doctor, who advises her on how to, restore the trees. And they end up having an affair. And that's kind of the plot. Not a lot of plot here. But what was interesting, how she used the tale of Genji is she talks a lot about, in the guise of giving lecture to her students, she talks about when the tales of Genji was written during the Hainan period. Now I can't remember. Anyway, that there was a plague during the time that was being written, and how there's a lot of themes of the transience of nature and the transient nature of life itself, which is exactly sort of what she's feeling herself and experiencing in the garden, right? She's gonna save the garden from its death, and she starts to save herself. There's just some interesting scenes. So like she talks a lot about like the fashion in the tales of Genji, and how writing about and how fashion during that period of time in Japan was part of flirtation and seduction in the court. And then she sort of then has a reminiscence about visiting Japan with her mother in the springtime and seeing the geishas come out in their very elaborate kimonos during cherry blossom season, which is a very short-lived season. And then she also talks about seeing the tree doctor removing his mask for the first time, and her seeing his face, and how that sort of becomes part of the seduction. So it's interesting how she uses the tales of Genji in this book. the other thing that's going on, there's a lot in here about motherhood too. She has these Zoom calls with her husband and children, and her husband is very much like, no, you know, you may not remember, but you know, there are periods of time where the lockdown requirements in Asia were way stricter than here, right? So she's trying to tell her husband and kids, you come here. And he's like, no, I can't leave this time zone. My job is too important. You need to try and get back here. Yet the rigmarole to try and get back there was very challenging at certain points in the pandemic. And you can see in those calls how constraining and claustrophobic her life was like with her family. And she talks about, there's a quote where she talks about the suppression of self, being a wife and mother, and how she had to put everything aside. She stopped writing. She stopped being interested in gardening. She stopped she stopped everything to cater to the needs of her husband and children. And so, in fact, this isolation in California and in this garden, you know, she's metaphorically able to bloom as the garden is blooming. As her relationship with the tree doctor blooms, right? So, you know, I enjoyed it. It was interesting. I could see some, so looking at good reviews, I'm assuming, based on the pictures, of that younger readers don't like this book. I will say, as a middle-aged person, reading about a middle-aged person, I really liked it. I really identified with some of her feelings about motherhood, you know, some of the stuff with her mother and her health issues. You know, I can certainly are things that you know, are relevant to people my age, right? So, you know, I enjoyed this book, but I do suspect that this is a book for a certain reader. That's what I'm going to say. And then the last thing, I literally just finished an hour and a half ago, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And this was for People April. You know, of course, I knew about this book, right? And everybody says this book is amazing, 5 stars. And I sort of assumed what they meant was it's amazing for such a young person. And I would say it's amazing, period. It's really hard to believe. I don't know if she's like 24, 25 when she writes this, young. Yet there's such maturity and poise and confidence in her writing in this book that it's really startling. So just, you know, wind back a bit. So Chanel Miller was a sexual assault victim on the Stanford campus, and this memoir is really her laying out what happened, the immediate aftermath, you know, her, you know, waking up in the hospital, and then the whole sort of trial process, sentencing process, appeal process, you know, the whole thing, and how she and her family and friends and boyfriend are sort of re-traumatized, publicly shamed, you know, sort of verbally, you know, maligned, you know, belittled in social media. You know, it is kind of horrible what she experienced. And I expected a lot of what she had to say about the criminal justice process. I expected a lot of that. But the way she wrote about it and the way she writes about how the delays and, you know, just the experience of showing up in the courtroom and having to testify, right? Just how traumatizing and how upsetting that was. And so a lot of this book is actually the impacts to her mental health. And that was the piece I was not expecting. I was really expecting more of a courtroom drama. And I would say yes, but really the majority of this book is about the mental health impacts for her. As well as the impacts to her family and her friends and her boyfriend, right? How everybody around her was impacted by what happened, as well as having to witness what she's going through. So this, I would say, even would work great for Mental Health May. But the other thing that I just found, again, really amazing about this book was there's not a lot of her being you could imagine where she would sort of go off on the perpetrator, the defense attorney, the judge, right? Like that could easily happen, right? That she could be very critical and blah, blah, blah. But she really doesn't. She lets their actions and their words speak for themselves. She doesn't cast judgment on the words that are spoken. She allows you, the reader, to cast judgment. And she just writes about how that made her feel. And so I think that's part of the aspect to this book that was so surprising to me. And again, made her just seem so mature and poised and elegant. Not that you can't be at, 24, 25 years of age, but it's so powerful in this book. So everybody said it was a 5-star read. Totally agree. It's interesting. She has a middle-age book coming out in a couple of months. So good for her. So that is what I have read. What do I got going on? I'm finishing Gods of the Upper Air. I'm almost done. This is I think my last People April read. Then I am reading Thunder Song by Sasha LaPointe. I do not know how to pronounce her middle name, and I'm really kicking myself. I went to an author event and I was late, so I didn't hear them pronounce her name. But she is a local Indigenous author, local to me. She is a member of the Nooksack and Upper Skagit Nations. And so I am reading this with Melinda from A Web of Stories. This is part of our Pacific Northwest Indigenous Reading Project. And that is it. I just finished The Tree Doctor on audio, so I need to pick up another audio. But that's what I've got going on. This week, hiking continues. I don't know. I don't think, well, I have to unknit my vest so I can re-knit it. But I don't really have any big plans coming up. So hoping to get a lot of reading in, and I hope you're able to get a lot of reading in too. All right. Hey, have a good one. Thanks for watching.